Imagine launching a massive holy war to liberate an oppressed people.
Right, a grand crusade to save the day.
Exactly. You marshal your forces, you plaster your propaganda everywhere, and you march in to break their chains.
Sounds incredibly heroic.
It does. But imagine when your armies finally arrive, the very people you are supposedly saving look at you and beg you to leave them alone.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. They tell you they actually like their old boss better.
That's an absolute PR nightmare.
It really is. But that bizarre scenario is exactly what happened when the legendary Byzantine Empire tried to, quote-unquote, rescue Italy in the 6th century.
Right.
Welcome back. Today, we have a deep dive that completely shatters one of history's most famous military campaigns. We are bringing you along to look at Emperor Justinian, his attempt to reconquer the West from the Ostrogoths, and the devastating reality of what it actually means to be liberated by a superpower.
And the historical illusion surrounding this conflict is just, well, it's incredibly resilient.
Oh, absolutely.
Because the traditional narrative, the one that gets passed down in standard textbooks, presents this as a glorious, straightforward restoration.
Right, the classic good guys versus bad guys story.
Exactly. Justinian, the great Eastern Roman emperor sitting in Constantinople, simply decides to take back Rome from the barbarians and reunite the empire.
It's framed as this noble, unavoidable crusade.
But it was anything but that.
So today, we are peeling back those layers of Byzantine PR. Our guide for this deep dive is a fascinating academic paper titled Reclaiming the West by Alessandro Carabia from the University of Birmingham.
That's a fantastic paper.
It really is. And our mission today is to understand the political, economic, and human machinery behind this colossal gamble.
Yeah, because by the end of this, you will see how empires actually construct the justifications for their wars.
Right, because the truth involves massive economic bailouts,
Yeah.
hostile corporate-style takeovers, and awkward religious tolerance from the supposed barbarians.
Not to mention a war that accidentally dragged on for 20 years, ruining the exact people it was designed to save.
So let's get into it. What really stands out in Carabia's research is how effectively the official narrative hid the sheer opportunism of the invasion.
Oh, they were masters of spin. I mean, our primary ancient source for this era is a historian named Procopius.
Right.
And he often presents the outlook of the war as this tragic series of falling dominoes, like an unavoidable diplomatic crisis.
But analyzing Justinian's deeper motives reveals a completely different engine driving the war machine, doesn't it?
It absolutely does.
So let's pull apart that official excuse first, the spark, and then look at what was really going on behind closed doors. Because according to state propaganda, Justinian only invaded because of a royal assassination.
Right, so the official spark involves the Ostrogothic kingdom in Italy. The great King Theodoric has died, and his daughter, Amalasuentha, takes over as regent.
And she is a pretty fascinating political figure, right?
Very much so. She was highly educated in the Roman tradition and culturally aligned with the Byzantine East.
Which I'm guessing didn't sit well with everyone at home.
Oh, not at all. Naturally, this caused intense friction with the more traditional martial Gothic nobility. They viewed her with deep suspicion.
So she realizes she is losing her grip on power and reaches out to Justinian for protection.
Exactly. She even contemplates fleeing to his court in Constantinople, but instead, she attempts this really risky political maneuver.
What'd she do?
She tries to consolidate power by sharing the throne with her cousin Theodahad.
Uh-oh. Let me guess, that doesn't go well.
It backfires spectacularly. Theodahad immediately betrays her, exiles her to a remote island, and has her assassinated.
Wow.
And Justinian seizes on this instantly. He declares he is marching into Italy to avenge his murdered ally and restore order.
You know, it feels very similar to the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, sparking World War I.
That's a great comparison.
I mean, Amalasuentha's murder was undeniably tragic, but practically speaking, wasn't this just the convenient, shiny excuse Justinian was waiting for?
Oh, 100%.
If we look at the timeline, was he genuinely executing a grand strategy of restoration, or was this invasion just desperate political deflection?
The evidence points heavily to political deflection, because Justinian was a ruler facing severe existential insecurity at home.
Okay, so what was going on in Constantinople?
To understand why he needed a war in Italy, you have to look at what happened in his own capital just a few years prior. He had barely survived the Nika riots.
Wait, I have heard of those. Weren't they started by chariot racing fans?
Yes, exactly.
It sounds almost absurd that sports hooligans could threaten an emperor. How does a riot at a racetrack lead to a massive invasion of Italy?
Well, in the highly autocratic Byzantine state, the chariot factions, primarily the blues and the greens, they weren't just sports fans.
What were they?
They operated as a mix of street gangs, political parties, and really the only legitimate avenue for the public to voice their grievances to the emperor.
Oh, so they had real political weight.
Huge weight, and the public frustration with Justinian's high taxes and corrupt officials just boiled over in the hippodrome.
So the sports fans team up.
Exactly. The factions united, rioted, and systematically burned down huge sections of Constantinople. They literally crowned a rival emperor.
So his entire regime is collapsing around him?
He was moments away from fleeing the city. He only survived because his generals trapped the rioters in the hippodrome and slaughtered an estimated 30,000 citizens.
In grief. 30,000.
Yeah, and on top of that bloodbath, Justinian was enforcing harsh crackdowns on various religious dissenters across his empire, alienating massive swaths of his own population.
So he was sitting on a powder keg of domestic hatred.
Exactly. He desperately needed a unifying, undeniable triumph to legitimize his rule.
And he already knew the fastest way to get that legitimacy because he had just run the exact same playbook in North Africa, right?
You hit the nail on the head. In 533, the Vandal king in North Africa was overthrown by a usurper.
Another diplomatic crisis.
Right. Justinian used that as an excuse to invade, and his army conquered the Vandals with shocking speed. He paraded the captured Vandal king and the spoils of war through the streets of Constantinople.
Let me guess. That victory instantly silenced his critics.
Completely. He realized that a swift military conquest was the ultimate Roman mechanism for projecting divine favor and absolute authority.
So when Amalasuentha is murdered in Italy, Justinian sees the exact same formula playing out.
It's copy and paste.
He thinks he can just hit repeat, use the usurpation as an excuse, send in the army, grab the glory, and secure his throne.
Right.
But launching an unprovoked war against a territory that has been peaceful for decades requires a massive PR campaign.
It really does.
I mean, you have to convince your own citizens to fund it, and you have to convince the Italians that you are the good guy.
And this is where the ideological justifications of religion and law come into play. Justinian couldn't simply conquer Italy. He had to frame the Ostrogothic kings as illegitimate tyrants. And this terminology was highly calculated. Calling them tyrants wasn't just political mudslinging, it was a legal mechanism.
Wait, so by labeling them tyrants, he wasn't just trying to win the moral high ground. Was he actually trying to exploit a legal loophole?
Precisely. Under Roman law, the acts of a tyrant are legally void.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. By retroactively declaring the Gothic rulers illegitimate, Justinian could legally invalidate all the land grants, property distributions, and tax exemptions they had given out over the past half-century.
So he just wipes the slate clean.
Right. It provided the Byzantine state with a legal framework to confiscate immense wealth the moment their troops arrived.
That is incredibly cynical.
It gets better. They literally carved this narrative into stone. The Byzantine general Narses later placed an inscription on the Salarian Bridge in Rome, boasting about liberating the city from the, quote, most wicked tyrant.
So the legal argument is basically, you are ruled by a tyrant, therefore we own your stuff.
That's the gist of it, yeah.
That is a tough sell for the locals. I imagine they leaned heavily on religion to make the liberation narrative more palatable to the everyday Italian.
Oh, religion was the cornerstone of the propaganda. Justinian was fiercely Orthodox, specifically Chalcedonian Christian. The Goths, however, practiced Arian Christianity.
Okay, so for those of us who aren't 6th century theologians, why did that distinction matter enough to start a war?
Well, theologically, Arians believed Jesus was subordinate to God the Father, while Chalcedonians believed they were equal.
Got it.
But practically and politically, it was the ultimate loyalty test. Justinian framed Arianism as a dangerous heresy.
So he makes it a holy war.
Exactly. He marketed his invasion as a holy crusade to rescue the Orthodox Christians of Italy from their heretical barbarian overlords. He was the divine protector stepping in to save their souls.
But if we look closely at the sources, this liberation narrative completely contradicts the reality on the ground.
It really does.
It is like a hostile corporate takeover, where the new CEO sends out a company-wide email claiming to save the workplace culture, but the employees actually loved the old boss.
That is the perfect analogy.
I mean, did the Italians even care about this theological split or want to be liberated by Justinian?
This brings up the profound irony of the entire conflict. The supposed barbarian Ostrogothic kings particularly Theodoric, were incredibly tolerant administrators.
Right.
Yeah, they actively respected the Orthodox Christians and allowed them to worship freely. They even stepped in to protect Jewish communities.
Wow, that's surprising for the time.
Yeah, they funded the rebuilding of synagogues in cities like Genoa and Milan after they were damaged in local disputes.
Meanwhile, the quote-unquote civilized Roman Emperor Justinian is back in Constantinople violently repressing Jews, Samaritans, Manichaeans, and anyone else who doesn't perfectly align with his specific brand of Christianity.
Exactly. The Goths were actually upholding the classical Roman values of pluralism and civic inclusivity far better than the emperor who claimed to be restoring Rome.
That is wild.
But Justinian needed the Italians to be oppressed so he could justify imposing his own absolute control.
Right.
And that control arrived in the form of a sweeping legal reform called the Corpus Juris Civilis.
That sounds intense.
It was. He forced it onto Italy through a decree known as the Pragmatica Sanctio in 554.
So what did that decree actually do to the people living there?
It effectively erased the local legal autonomy the Goths had carefully maintained. It centralized all legal authority back to Constantinople.
Do they lose all their local rights?
Right. For a local Italian landowner, it meant the independent systems they had relied on for decades were dismantled overnight. They were being freed from their own independence.
The propaganda is brilliant, honestly. But we know moral crusades and legal loopholes are really just the marketing brochure for empire.
Absolutely.
Wars run on money. So let's pivot away from the ideology and follow the grain. If you are an empire recovering from massive riots and fighting on multiple fronts, how does conquering Italy actually fix your balance sheet?
To understand the cold, hard economics of this reconquest, you have to visualize the supply chains of the ancient Mediterranean.
Okay, lay it out for us.
Justinian didn't just target the city of Rome for its symbolic value. His first targets were North Africa and Sicily,
Why those two specifically?
because these regions were the absolute bread baskets of the ancient world. Reclaiming them was fundamentally about seizing the food supply and an incredibly lucrative tax base.
So if we follow the money, how lucrative was a place like Sicily at this time?
Staggeringly lucrative. Carabia's paper highlights the estates belonging to the Ravenese church located in Sicily.
Okay.
Just those specific estates were producing 50,000 modi of wheat and 31,000 gold solidi annually.
Wait, let me translate that into modern impact because those numbers are wild.
Go for it.
50,000 modi is roughly 3/4 pounds of wheat.
Yeah.
That is enough grain to feed a small army or a massive city for an entire year. And 31,000 solidi represents hundreds of pounds of solid, minted gold.
It's a massive fortune.
That is an astonishing amount of wealth flowing from just one island's church estates.
And by capturing Sicily, along with Sardinia, Corsica, and the Balearics, Justinian completely reconnected the maritime shipping lanes.
He's securing the whole network.
Exactly. He essentially took control of the entire Roman economic engine, stretching from the coast of Spain all the way to Syria.
It is the equivalent of seizing the central distribution hubs and the shipping routes of a modern global economy, like taking over all the Amazon fulfillment centers at once.
Exactly.
If you control the warehouse and the freeways, you dictate the terms of survival for everyone else.
You hold all the cards.
But what did this economic strategy actually feel like for the local Italians whose wheat and gold were suddenly being redirected east?
Well, it was economically devastating for the locals, and it completely shattered the illusion of liberation.
I can imagine.
Because right behind the Byzantine troops came the Byzantine tax collectors. The paper mentions one official in particular, a logothete named Alexander, whose historical nickname was literally Scissors.
Wait, Alexander Scissors? Cannot make that up. Why do they call him that?
He earned the nickname because he was so ruthlessly efficient at extracting wealth. He would literally clip the edges off gold coins to shortchange the locals and enrich the state treasury.
Oh, that's incredibly corrupt.
Sending a man nicknamed Scissors to bleed your newly liberated citizens dry is a public relations disaster.
To say the least.
And furthermore, Carabia notes that Justinian immediately reinstated the Annona tax the moment he gained control.
So for the listener who might not know, the Annona wasn't just a standard income tax, right? How did that work?
The Annona was a direct, state-mandated requisition of agricultural produce.
So taking the actual crops.
Right. It wasn't about giving the government a percentage of your profits. It was the government forcibly taking the actual food you grew to feed their armies and capital.
Wow.
The Goths had suspended it due to the disruptions of the war. Justinian turning it back on immediately sent a very clear message.
Basically, congratulations on your freedom from the tyrant. Here is your staggering bill. Please hand over your harvest.
Exactly. The Italians quickly realized they were not viewed as long-lost citizens returning to the imperial fold. They were a revenue stream.
That must have been a bitter pill to swallow.
Especially because Justinian was building colossal monuments like the Hagia Sophia and fighting an incredibly expensive, grinding war against the Persian Empire in the east.
So he just needed cash.
Massive amounts of cash. Italy was simply an asset to be liquidated to fund his centralized state. The sheer greed of these Byzantine officials drove many Italians right back into the arms of the Gothic resistance.
So we have this beautifully crafted propaganda, and we have the ruthless economic extraction plan. But, no plan survives contact with the enemy.
Very true.
Let's look at the reality on the ground. How did this grand imperial design actually hold up when the Byzantine boots hit Italian soil?
Well, it completely collapsed into chaos, largely due to profound military miscalculations.
How so?
We discussed how Justinian expected a repeat of his lightning-fast victory in North Africa. But the resources he committed to the Italian campaign were shockingly inadequate for the task.
Yeah, I found this detail in the source material completely baffling.
Right.
I mean, the Eastern Roman Empire was at its peak, vastly richer and more populous than the West. Yet, Justinian sends his star general, Belisarius, to land in Sicily with only 7,000 soldiers.
It's tiny.
7,000 men to conquer an entire peninsula populated by entrenched, battle-hardened Goths. Was Justinian just blinded by his own hubris, assuming the locals would immediately rise up and do the fighting for him?
Hubris was certainly a factor. He did expect local uprisings that largely failed to materialize.
Shocker.
Right. But the tiny force size was also the result of a broader strategic failure. Justinian was heavily distracted and financially drained by the Persian front.
Fighting a two-front war.
Exactly. And crucially, Belisarius' 7,000 men were never supposed to act alone. Justinian had planned a massive, two-pronged attack.
Okay, so what was the rest of the plan?
Belisarius was meant to be a distraction in the south, while a much larger Byzantine army under a general named Mundus invaded from the north through Dalmatia.
Let me guess. The northern invasion didn't go according to plan.
It was a catastrophe. Mundus's army bogged down against the main Gothic forces, and Mundus himself was killed in battle.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the entire northern offensive disintegrated, and this accidentally stranded Belisarius.
So he's just stuck.
Completely. A force of 7,000 men, originally designed just to secure a southern beachhead, was suddenly facing the undivided attention of the entire Ostrogothic military machine.
Well, that explains why a campaign Justinian thought would take a few months ended up dragging on for 20 years.
It turned into a nightmare.
But how did the everyday people of Italy navigate this? The Byzantine propaganda tells us they rejoiced. But if you are an everyday farmer, your priorities are very different.
Absolutely. The local loyalties were fractured and constantly shifting based on survival.
Like, who do I side with to not get killed today?
Exactly. You certainly had some Roman elites, like Archbishop Datius of Milan, who actively aided the Byzantines and believed in the idea of restoration.
Okay.
But you also had prominent Roman senators, like Cassiodorus, who wrote letters to Justinian before the war even started, explicitly begging him not to invade.
Wait, really? Just please stay away.
Basically, yeah. They were telling the emperor, we are already prospering, please leave us alone.
The paper highlights a piece of archaeological evidence that really anchors this abstract war in human reality. It's called the Treasure of Dishana.
Oh, that's such a poignant detail.
What does that hoard tell us about the people living through this?
The Treasure of Dishana is a hoard found in northern Italy, and its most fascinating artifact is a golden wedding ring.
A wedding ring?
Yeah, and the ring is inscribed with the names of a Roman man and a Gothic woman.
Oh, wow.
It is tangible proof that the Goths were not just an isolated, occupying military force. After decades of peace under leaders like Theodoric, the two cultures were deeply intertwined.
They were just living their lives.
Right. They were living next to each other, conducting business, and marrying each other.
It paints a picture of a society that was integrating. And Justinian's invasion took a sledgehammer to that integration.
It shattered it.
Because the violence that followed wasn't just military skirmishes, it was total war against the civilian population.
Absolutely. The brutality...
Right. Their primary goal wasn't upholding grand theological doctrines. It was simply surviving the winter without being murdered by an angry Gothic warband or starved to death by a greedy Byzantine tax collector.
That is the grim reality of the conflict. The war did not bring order, it brought apocalyptic destruction to the peninsula.
When you zoom out and synthesize all these pieces, Justinian's deep dive into Italy is a masterclass in the mechanics of empire.
It really is.
It wasn't a straightforward rescue mission. It was a messy, devastating collision of an insecure ruler's need for domestic political legitimacy, wrapped in rigid religious dogmatism, and fueled by an insatiable need for agricultural and tax revenue.
Beautifully summarized.
And the shiny propaganda package he used to sell it instantly fell apart the moment his tiny army made contact with the complex, integrated reality of Ostrogothic Italy.
And I think the critical takeaway for you here is the necessity of historical skepticism.
Oh, definitely.
Whenever a superpower claims it is going to war strictly for moral reasons, to liberate an oppressed people or restore a lost golden age, that is the exact moment you need to look past the rhetoric.
Follow the money.
Exactly. Look for the vital economic shipping routes. Look for the domestic political scandals the leader is trying to escape. Look for the tax ledgers.
Because the language of freedom is very often just the necessary cover story for resource extraction.
Perfectly said.
That's something for you to keep in mind the next time you hear a political speech echoing those same grand promises. But before we wrap up, the sources provide one final, mind-bending historical what-if that perfectly encapsulates the senseless tragedy of this entire war.
Oh, this part is just heartbreaking.
It really is. Set the scene for us.
It happens in the year 540. The war has been dragging on for 5 brutal years. The Byzantine army has finally pushed north and is besieging the Gothic capital of Ravenna.
Okay, so they have them cornered.
Right. The Gothic king, Vitiges, is starving and desperate. In a stunning move, he offers an incredible peace treaty to the Byzantines.
And the terms he offers are practically a total victory for Justinian, aren't they?
They are unbelievable.
Vitiges offers to surrender all of Italy south of the Po River. That includes Rome, Naples, Sicily, and all the wealthy agricultural land. He hands it straight to the empire.
It's basically everything they wanted.
And in exchange, the Goths just want to keep a small territory in the north and agree to become a loyal vassal state, paying tribute and fighting for the Byzantines.
Like I said, it was everything Justinian wanted. He would get the prestige, the grain, the gold, and the strategic buffer, all without spending another coin or shedding another drop of blood.
It's a win-win.
And the historical record shows that Justinian actually said yes. He agreed to the terms. He was willing to compromise his absolutist vision of total restoration to secure peace and massive profit.
But the treaty was never signed.
It never happened. Because
Yay.
his star general, Belisarius, who was on the ground in Italy, stubbornly refused to sign the document.
Wait, his own general? Why?
Whether he thought the Goths were laying a trap or his own ego demanded the glory of an unconditional surrender, Belisarius disobeyed his emperor. The peace deal collapsed.
That is maddening.
And because of that single refusal, the war dragged on for another 15 agonizing years, utterly depopulating and ruining the Italian peninsula.
It leaves you with a haunting question to ponder on your own. How wildly different would the history of Europe, the preservation of ancient infrastructure, and the very map of Italy look today if a single general had simply swallowed his pride, obeyed his emperor, and put down his sword?
It's wild to think about.
It turns out, when an empire decides to rescue you, the most dangerous people in the room aren't always the supposed enemies. Sometimes it is the liberators holding the sledgehammers, refusing to stop swinging. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We will catch you next time.